Hey guys, thanks for trying science. Today we're going to be talking about genetics and Punnett squares, which help us predict future genetics and future heredity. So let's get into it. Let's find out how genetic probabilities are calculated using a Punnett square today. Let's do a quick review. Don't forget, when we talked about genes, we talked about dominant or recessive. Some genes are dominant. Maybe you can think of it as stronger or weaker, or one that takes over from the other one. Dominant genes, you get two genes, one from each parent. Dominant genes only need to be present as one of them for you to get the trait, whereas a recessive gene would not show up if the dominant was present, and you would need two recessive to have that trait. When we talk about the word genotype, we're talking about the type of genes, genotype. So it's the genes in your cells. We're going to represent it by letters. Capital letter is the dominant trait. Lowercase is recessive. So we have three possible genotypes. In this case, capital, capital, capital lowercase, or two lowercase. Phenotype is what you actually see, the outward appearance. The trait is written as a description. For example, in the case of this trait, dimples or no dimples. And dimples was a dominant trait. When something is pure, we're talking about it having the same type of gene in both, so two dominants or two recessives. Sometimes called homozygous, which means same. Hybrids or heterozygous have different genes. In this case, capital and lowercase, a dominant and a recessive. The genes we're going to be speaking about today in our examples all are genes that code for one type of trait. So if you have the gene, you have the trait. In real life, it's usually a lot more genes combining to cause a trait, but these are simple genes we're talking about that if you have the gene, you have the trait. A Punnett square helps you kind of keep track and predict the future outcome of a cross or breeding, whether it's dogs or if it's children or people or whatever. We can look at, if you know the parent's genes or genotype, you can predict the outcome of the offspring. So this is how it works. Everyone has two copies of a gene. One copy from mom and one from dad. In the process of creating the cells that combine to form a person or a dog or whatever, you can combine the mother's genes and the father's genes in a variety of ways. Maybe we should try to keep track of that. So let's see where these genes are going. So the dominant gene, the genes are all over the place. And this dominant gene got together. This dominant gene could combine with the dominant gene or the recessive gene. Okay, I'm starting to get lost. I see why the genes were everywhere. Let's find a better, more organized way to do this. And that's what a Punnett square does. So we have some squares in your notes. Let's try it. Let's do the cross between two parents that are both hybrid or heterozygous for the dimples trait. Normally we'll put the father's genotype on top and the mother's on the side. But if you don't know and you put the mother's on the top and the father's on the side, it'll still work. It's just going to be predicting mathematically what will happen, and the squares help keep track of all the DNA, the genes. So what we do is we put our father's genotype at the top, and then we fill in the boxes below with each of these genes. And same for the mom, but this time we bring it over. Now we've got a record of all the different possible combinations of these genes from your mom and dad. And then we can start to look at some probabilities. What's more likely to happen? Let's see what happens when the parents of a recessive for dimples, in this case the father, and a hybrid for dimples, mother. Now we can see that there's 2 out of the 4 possibilities. And remember, this is just probability, so we can write that as a percent. That's 50% of the children would be expected to have the recessive trait. The father had the recessive trait, no dimples. The mother had dimples, but had this gene here carrying this gene that you weren't seeing. You were just seeing the dimples. 2 of the kids also, like mom, have the hybrid genotype. All right, let's try one more. See what you can do with this one. So I'll wait and let you try to fill in, just so you know how the squares work. Okay, let's see if we can fill in. The dad, the father, has 2 dominant genes, so we'll bring those down. The mother's 2 recessive genes, we'll bring those over. And now we've got our prediction for what the offspring will be. It's a 100% chance that all of the children will be hybrid, which means they'll all have the trait, in this case, the dimples. Okay, let's take a look at this example. Now, last time we looked at this, we were able to determine that the white color is a dominant trait. Because if you've got one dominant gene, you have the trait. In the case of being not white or red, these are 2 lowercase. These are 2 recessive. Okay, let's see if we can make a cross and a Punnett square to show the result of a white and red flower cross. Well, first we need to know the parents' genes, the genotype. So let's look back. We know we've got a red, so that's 2 lowercase w's. We'll put them here. And then we've got, 2 choices. We could either have 2 dominants or a hybrid. So let's do now. How are we going to set up our other one, and why do we have 2? Well, remember, if you have a white flower, you could either have the hybrid or the purebred form. So, what would we put here? Since we don't know what it's going to be, we're going to have one square with the capitals and one with a capital and a lowercase. And these 2 are both lowercase. Okay? When you fill in your Punnett squares, you get to predict what those flowers would look like. And if they have any capital W's, they're going to have white. Okay, we're going to move on to page 8 and do some practice problems. We'll do the first few together, and then you can do the rest on your own. Okay, on page 8, there's a picture. Sorry, there's a word problem. So let's get into it. Number 1. What percentage of offspring would be expected to have short whiskers from the cross of 2 long whiskered seals? One parent is homozygous dominant and the other is heterozygous. Okay, I need to read that again, and I also need some more background information. So let's read everything. Let's say that in seals, one gene for the length of your whiskers has 2 alleles, or genes. The dominant, capital W, codes for long whiskers. Then the recessive, lowercase, codes for short whiskers. So if it has a capital W, it has long whiskers. Got it. So what's the percentage? What's the chance of the offspring having short whiskers when we're crossing the parents of both long whiskered seals? One homozygous dominant, the other heterozygous. Okay, the hardest part of this might be just setting up the problem. We need to know what to put for the genotypes of the parents. So we know that we're using the letter W. We know that we have one parent homozygous, which means they're the same. So that's capital W, capital W. I'm going to underline the capitals because it's hard to tell sometimes with W's which is capital and which is lowercase. The other parent is heterozygous. That just means different, so we have one capital and one lowercase. Oh, and there they are with the long whiskers. Great. Okay, now we're going to fill in our chart by bringing the W down and over. and down and over from here to show what possible combinations could occur. We'll bring that capital W down. The lowercase w comes over this capital W. Great. Okay. Now there's some more things we're going to do over here. So the genotype possibilities, and this will be the same for all of these problems. The first possibility is a pure dominant. In other words, both of the genes are the dominant form. The second possibility is a hybrid, one dominant, one recessive. And finally, you could get two recessives. For now, we're not sure what the percentages are going to be of these, but we can set up every problem with these three possibilities. Now we look over at our children here inside the boxes, and we can calculate percents. So we're looking for how many are dominant purebreds. 1, 2 out of 4 is 50%. We could predict that half of the offspring will have the genotype capital W, and the other 50% are the hybrid, capital lowercase. And I don't see any situation with these parents where this genotype is possible, so it's not possible. It's a 0% chance. Okay, now we've got our phenotypes. There's two choices. Remember, phenotype is the physical trait. So I'm going to go back to my word problem. Let's see. C is the gene for the length of the whiskers, long and short. Okay. So what I'm going to do, get rid of this first. We've got two choices. We've got long whiskers and short whiskers. And I'm putting long on top just because it's dominant, so it's easy for me to remember which is which. Okay. To have long whiskers, you just need to have one of the W's being capital or dominant. So, hey, that's all of them. So that's 100%. Which leaves 0% short. So let's go back to our problem. What did they ask? What percentage of the offspring would be expected to have short whiskers? None. 0% if these were the parents. All right, try number 2. If one parent seal is long, pure whiskered, and the other is short whiskered, what percent offspring would have short whiskers? One parent is pure, long whiskered. So what genes would we put here for one of the parents? Based on the word problem, the parent is pure for long whiskers. Long whiskers is dominant, and they're pure. Okay, so I've got one of the parents up here. The other parent has short whiskers. Short whiskers means there's no dominant trait at all, so short whiskers are 2 recessive, lowercase w. Okay, go ahead and fill in your chart. See if you can do it without me. Okay, looks like they're all the same. Looks like all of the offspring have the same genotype. But just to be consistent, what are the possible outcomes that could happen? Hybrid or pure recessive. Okay, so what did we find out? We found out we had no pure dominance, 100% hybrid, and no pure recessive. And then we have to think what that means for phenotype. Phenotype is either long or short whiskers. What percent are going to have long? What percent are going to have short? That's all there are. There's only the two choices. 1, 2. Oh, looks like all 4 have the long whiskered trait in their phenotype, physical, and none short. So let's read our question. What's the percent of short whiskers? Again, 0% chance. Okay, go to the back. Why don't you pause the video and try to do this one, set it up, and then come back and see how you did. Okay, in purple people eaters, one horn is dominant. So here's my purple people eater with a horn. That's a dominant trait, capital H. Lowercase h is recessive. Great. So put a capital H on him to remind me that that is a dominant trait. Okay, I've got a Punnett square and I want to show the cross between a hybrid and one with no horns. A hybrid means one of each, if I remember my definitions, right? Sure. And one with no horns. Now horns are dominant, so if you're going to have no horns, then you can only have the two recessives. Okay, filling in the chart's the easy part now. Okay, those are the possible outcomes. How'd you do? Genotypes, remember it's always the same. You can have pure dominant, hybrid, or pure recessive. So in this example, we had no pure dominance, 2 out of 4, which is 50% chance for a hybrid, and 50% chance for the pure recessive form without the horn. Okay, so our two phenotypes are horn, that's the actual physical trait you'd see, or no horn. Now, anytime there's a dominant gene, you have the horn, so that is 50% of the time. And 50% no horn or pure recessive. And that's exactly the same proportions of the genes in the mother and father. So that dominant trait's not about to take over the population. It's still going to be percent in the same exact percentages of the parents. All right, you've got one more to do. In humans, brown eyes are dominant over blue. So how can brown-eyed parents have a blue-eyed child? For this one, you're going to have to read that problem a couple times and figure out what these genes are. And you may need 2 squares. I've provided one. If you need another one, you can draw another square down on your paper. And that's just a little hint. Pause, see what you can do, and come back. Okay, in humans, brown eyes are going to be capital B. They're dominant over blue, lowercase. A brown-eyed man marries a brown-eyed woman, and they have children. 3 of their children have brown eyes, and 1 has blue. How is this possible? How can you have... Now I'm going to write a dominant gene for both because we know both parents have the brown eyes. But what is their other gene going to be in order for them to have the possibility of having that recessive blue-eyed? So common sense says they're going to need that recessive gene. Even though you don't see it in their phenotype, it's there. Now if you did another square where you had another dominant trait, you would see that there's no way other than 2 hybrid genotypes being able to produce the blue-eyed child. Here we go. And there's my chances of the outcomes. So my genotypes are pure dominant, hybrid, pure recessive. Let's see, I've got 1 out of 4, that's 25%. Hybrids are 2 out of 4, that's 50%. Remember, this whole thing has to add up to 100. So that gives me another 25% chance. So there's a chance. 1 in 4 chance of a child having the blue eyes. So for our phenotypes, brown was dominant, and blue was recessive. All right, let's see. how many? So brown, yeah, and brown, that's 50 plus 25, that's 75% of the children are expected to have the brown eyes, but in that 25% chance of getting this genotype, we're going to get a blue-eyed child. Pretty cool. Okay, now what you're going to do is you are going to work on pass it on. So you're going to work on pass it on in your packet here. Read carefully, read those word problems a couple of times. You're going to fill in the genotypes and the phenotypes here. And then you're going to be able to answer the question about what percentage of different things occur. And there's a back. When you're done filling out all of this, go to Schoology and answer the questions. There's multiple choice questions that you'll get right if you do these right. So be careful, do this first, then go to Schoology and answer the questions, all right? And hey, thanks for trying science. I hope that made a little bit of sense. Go back and watch it 4 or 5 times if you need to. But I know it was a lot. But thanks for hanging in there, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye for now.